Imagine falling 24,000 feet inside the severed tail of a bomber, both arms shattered, your parachute destroyed, still firing at enemy fighters as you plummet toward Earth. Imagine surviving that fall. Imagine what comes after. This is not fiction. This happened to a 19-year-old boy from Wisconsin on his very first combat mission. What you are about to hear will challenge everything you think you know about human endurance. Before we begin, please subscribe to this channel, hit the like button, and comment below telling us where you are watching from, your city, state, or country. Now, let me tell you about the day Eugene Moran refused to die. The cold came first. It always did at altitude, 24,000 feet above the German countryside. The temperature inside the tail gun position of the B-17 Flying Fortress hovered near 60 degrees below zero. Staff Sergeant Eugene Moran crouched in his tiny compartment, separated from the rest of the crew by a narrow crawl space, alone with the twin 50-caliber machine guns and the impossible vastness of the sky. He was 19 years old. This was November 29, 1943. This was his first combat mission. The aircraft shuddered and bucked through the flak-darkened air above Bremen. Eugene could feel every vibration through his boots, through his gloves, through the bones of his skull. The 8th Air Force had sent them here, more than 300 bombers in a vast aerial armada, to destroy the industrial heart of northern Germany. Their B-17, named Rikki Tikki Tavi after the fearless mongoose in the Kipling story, flew in formation with dozens of other fortresses, their contrails writing temporary scripture across the winter sky. Eugene had grown up in the quiet farmlands of Wisconsin, where the loudest sound was wind through cornfields and the horizon stretched flat and endless. He had volunteered for this. He had trained for this. But nothing in training had prepared him for the reality of combat at altitude, the way fear tasted like copper in your mouth, the way your hands trembled inside heavy gloves not from cold alone, but from the knowledge that men were trying to kill you and you were trying to kill them back. The flak came up in ugly black flowers, bursting around the formation with sounds like steel drums being crushed. Shrapnel rattled against the aluminum skin of the aircraft. Eugene scanned the sky through his gun sight, watching for the fighters he knew would come. The Luftwaffe always came. German pilots were good, experienced, desperate to stop the American bombers from tearing their country apart one city at a time. The bomb run felt like it lasted forever. Eugene felt the aircraft rise slightly as the bombardier released the payload, tons of high explosive tumbling away toward the factories and docks below. The pilot banked hard, turning for home, turning for England, turning away from the worst of the flak. For a moment, Eugene allowed himself to think they might make it through their first mission without serious damage. That thought lasted perhaps 30 seconds. The number 2 engine died with a sound like a shotgun blast amplified 1,000 times. Black smoke poured from the cowling. The aircraft lurched, dropped, struggled to maintain altitude and speed. Eugene felt the fortress falling behind the formation, falling away from the protection of mass defensive firepower, becoming exactly what no bomber crew ever wanted to be: alone, wounded, vulnerable. The German fighters found them almost immediately. Messerschmitt 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s, sleek and deadly, peeling away from attacks on the main formation to concentrate on the straggler. Eugene swung his guns to track them, feeling the familiar weight of the weapons, the resistance of the mechanisms in the brutal cold. The fighters came in pairs, in fours, diving and climbing and rolling, their cannon fire walking through the air toward the fortress. Eugene fired back. The 50s hammered and roared, spent brass casings tumbling away into the slipstream. He could see his tracers reaching out, could see the German aircraft dancing through his fire. The noise was beyond comprehension, beyond anything that could be called sound. It was pressure, concussion, a physical force that threatened to crack his skull from the inside. A fighter flashed past so close Eugene could see the pilot's face, could see the black crosses on the wings, could see the muzzle flash from the cannon. Shells slammed into the fortress. The aircraft shook like a living thing in agony. Eugene kept firing, kept tracking, kept doing the only thing he could do, which was fight back against the sky full of enemies who wanted him dead. He did not know, could not know, that cannon fire had just torn through the waist of the aircraft, killing the waist gunners instantly. He did not know the radio operator was dead. The bombardier was dead. The flight engineer was bleeding out in the top turret. He knew only that fighters kept coming, kept attacking, and he kept firing until his gun barrels glowed and the ammunition cans ran low and his shoulders ached from the recoil. The cold was unimaginable. At 24,000 feet, without pressurization, without proper heating, the air was thin enough to make every breath feel insufficient and cold enough to freeze exposed skin in seconds. Eugene wore layers of clothing, heated suit elements that barely functioned, heavy gloves that made fine motor control nearly impossible. He could feel the cold seeping through everything, finding his bones, making his muscles stiff and slow. The oxygen mask pressed against his face, frost forming on the rubber, each breath tasting of rubber and ice and fear. Time became strange. Seconds stretched, minutes compressed. Eugene fired at a fighter climbing away, saw his tracers fall short, traversed left to meet another attack. The sky was full of smoke and contrails and falling debris. He saw another fortress go down, trailing fire, tiny figures tumbling away from the stricken aircraft. He saw parachutes bloom white against the darkness. He wondered if those men would survive, if the Germans would capture them, or if they would freeze to death before reaching the ground, if their chutes would even open properly in the thin air. The hits kept coming. Shells punched through the tail section, through the thin aluminum that was all that separated Eugene from the void. One round passed so close to his head he felt the shock wave, felt the heat of its passage. Another took out part of his left gun mount. Shrapnel peppered his position, cutting through his flight suit, drawing blood. He kept firing. There was nothing else to do. Stopping meant dying. Fighting meant maybe dying slower, maybe taking some of them with him, maybe giving the pilot enough time to get them somewhere they could bail out over friendly territory. Then the intercom went dead. Eugene called for the pilot, for anyone, and heard only static and silence. He was alone now in every way that mattered, cut off from the crew, unable to coordinate, unable to know what was happening forward in the aircraft. He made the decision every tail gunner dreaded: stay in position or try to crawl forward through the fuselage to find out if anyone else was still alive. He stayed. The fighters were still attacking. Leaving his guns unmanned would make it easier for them. So he stayed in his tiny metal cage in the sky, stayed with his 50s, stayed doing his job while the fortress came apart around him. Another fighter made its run. Eugene tracked it, let it, fired. He saw his round strike home, saw pieces fly off the enemy aircraft, saw it roll away trailing smoke. He did not know if he had killed it or only damaged it. There was no time to watch. Another was already coming in from a different angle, cannon blazing. The shells that hit him came from above and behind, fired by a fighter he never saw, fired by a pilot who was just doing his job the same way Eugene was doing his. The first round shattered his left arm below the elbow. The second destroyed his right arm above the wrist. The pain was immediate, absolute, overwhelming. Eugene screamed into his oxygen mask, screamed, and could not hear his own voice over the roar of wind and engines and gunfire. Blood sprayed inside his gloves, inside his flight suit, hot against the impossible cold. He could not move his hands. He could not grip. He could not do anything but watch as his guns fell silent and the fighters kept coming. He tried to reach the intercom, tried to call for help, but his arms would not obey. His hands were foreign objects, distant and useless, painting the inside of his compartment red. He did not pass out. Later he would wish he had. Later he would wish for the mercy of unconsciousness. But in that moment he remained aware, remained trapped in a body that had been transformed from a weapon into a victim, remained capable of nothing but witnessing what came next. The cannon fire walked forward through the fuselage. Eugene heard it more than saw it, heard the impacts, heard the screaming of metal, heard silence where voices should have been. Navigator Jesse Orison was still alive somewhere forward. Everyone else was gone. 10 men had taken off from England that morning. 2 remained alive, separated by a stretch of shattered aircraft, unable to help each other, unable to do anything but wait for the end. Eugene looked down at his parachute pack. The silk was shredded, destroyed by the same cannon fire that had ruined his arms. Even if he could move, even if he could bail out, the parachute would not save him. He was trapped, wounded, finished. He did not pray. He did not think about his family back in Wisconsin, about his mother and father, about the farm, about the girl he had dated before the war. He thought about nothing. The pain filled everything. The cold filled everything. There was no room for thought, only sensation, only the animal awareness that he was dying and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The fortress broke apart at 17,000 feet. The structural damage, the weight of the destroyed engines, the stress of combat maneuvers, all of it exceeded what the airframe could bear. The fuselage separated just ahead of the tail section. One moment Eugene was in an aircraft. The next moment he was in a piece of an aircraft, a severed tail section tumbling away from the rest of the bomber, spinning through the thin air with nothing to control it, nothing to slow it, nothing between him and the ground except gravity and time. He should have gone into a flat spin. He should have tumbled end over end, consciousness ripped away by G-forces, death coming as a mercy before impact. But the tail section still had its vertical and horizontal stabilizers, still had enough aerodynamic surface to create drag to slow the fall to keep him partially oriented. He fell, but he fell slower than he should have. He remained conscious. He remained aware. The world spun past the shattered windows of his compartment. Sky, ground, sky, ground. He could see the earth below, could see it growing larger, could see fields and forests and villages, could see the rest of his aircraft falling separately, could see parachutes in the distance that might have been Orison or might have been German aircrew from damaged fighters. The spin was sickening. His inner ear screamed. His stomach heaved. Blood from his shattered arms painted spiral patterns on the inside of the tail section. He fell through 17,000 feet, 16,000, 15,000. The air grew thicker, warmer, easier to breathe, but no less deadly. He could not move. He could not prepare. He could only fall and watch and wait for the impact that would end it. At some point during the fall, Eugene noticed the German fighters were still with him. They had followed the tail section down, circling it, probably trying to understand what they were seeing, probably radiating their ground controllers that a piece of an American bomber was falling with someone still alive inside. One pilot came close enough that Eugene could see him in the cockpit, could see him pointing, could see the expression of disbelief on his face. Eugene reached for his guns with arms that would not work. His hands were destroyed. His weapons were silent. But the instinct remained, the training remained, the stubborn refusal to quit even when quitting was the only rational choice. He tried. God, he tried. His body simply would not obey. The tail section hit the trees at approximately 3,000 feet, tumbling through heavy German forest, breaking branches, shedding pieces of itself, decelerating with brutal force. Eugene was thrown against his harness, against the walls of his compartment, against every surface hard enough to break bones. The noise was catastrophic. Metal screamed. Wood shattered. The world became a chaos of impact and motion and pain layered on pain layered on pain. Then the ground. The tail section hit earth and plowed through frozen soil and came to rest on its side in a small clearing surrounded by pine trees. The sudden stop was almost worse than the impacts that preceded it. Eugene felt his ribs crack, felt his head snap forward against the gun sight, felt consciousness waver and fade, and then surge back with cruel insistence. He was alive. Impossibly, inexplicably, against every law of probability and physics, he was alive. He could not move. He could not feel his legs. His arms were ruined. His chest felt like someone had driven a truck over it, but he was breathing. His heart was beating. He remained somehow alive. The silence after the crash was total. No engines, no gunfire, no radio chatter, just whined through broken metal and the distant sound of something burning and the ragged rhythm of his own breathing inside his oxygen mask. He lay there in the wreckage of his compartment and tried to understand that he had survived a fall from altitude that should have killed him 10 times over. The German soldiers found him within the hour. They pulled him from the wreckage roughly, without care for his injuries, weapons trained on him as if he posed any threat at all. Eugene tried to speak and found he could not, tried to stand and found his legs would not hold him. They laid him in the frozen mud beside the wreckage, and searched him for weapons and intelligence, and left him there, while they argued in German about what to do with him. He drifted in and out of awareness. The pain was too much for consciousness to process continuously. His mind protected itself by shutting down periodically, then dragging him back to awareness when his breathing became too shallow or his heart rate dropped too low. Each time he woke, he saw the same scene. German soldiers, forest, wreckage, gray sky. Each time he woke, he was colder than before. They did not give him medical care. Not that day. They took him to a local garrison, threw him in a cell, left him on a stone floor with his wounds untreated, an infection already beginning to set in. He learned later that German policy regarding captured American airmen was deliberately cruel in those months, a response to the strategic bombing campaign that was destroying German cities. He was not a prisoner of war to be treated according to the Geneva Conventions. He was a terror bomber who deserved whatever suffering came to him. The infection moved fast. By the second day, Eugene was delirious with fever, his arms swollen and reeking, his body trying desperately to fight off the bacteria consuming his damaged tissue. He should have died then. Medical science said he should have died. Blood loss, shock, infection, lack of treatment, all of it pointed toward death as the only logical outcome. 2 Serbian doctors, themselves prisoners forced to work in the German medical system, intervened. They saw Eugene and recognized that without immediate surgery he would be dead within days. They had no proper equipment, no anesthesia, no surgical suite. They had basic instruments, some sulfa powder, and their training. They operated on him in a converted storage room, cutting away destroyed tissue, setting shattered bones, fighting the infection with the only antibiotic available in any quantity. Eugene remained conscious through most of it. He felt the scalpel. He felt the bone saws. He felt every moment of agony as they tried to save what remained of his arms. He screamed until his voice gave out, then screamed silently, then mercifully passed out and woke hours later to find himself bandaged and still alive and wishing he was not. The fever climbed. 103 degrees. 104. His body fought the infection and the surgery and the trauma all at once. The Serbian doctors stayed with him, changing bandages, administering what little medicine they had, keeping him hydrated when he could not keep water down, refusing to let him slip away into the darkness that kept calling his name. He survived the fever. Barely. When it broke, he weighed perhaps 110 pounds, down from the 150 he had carried when he climbed into Rikki Tikki Tavi that November morning. His arms were permanent ruins, mobility destroyed, function reduced to crude, grasping motions. But he was alive. Still impossibly alive. They transferred him to Stalag Luft IV, a prisoner of war camp in northern Germany. The conditions were medieval: overcrowding, starvation rations, no heat, no medical care beyond the most basic. Eugene learned to survive on soup made from rotten vegetables and bread that was more sawdust than grain. He learned to sleep on wooden boards in barracks so cold that water froze solid overnight. He learned to live with pain that never stopped, with injuries that would never heal properly, with the knowledge that every day might be the day his body finally gave up. The other prisoners helped him as much as they could. Men shared their rations, helped him dress, helped him with tasks his ruined arms could not manage. But everyone was starving. Everyone was sick. Everyone was trying to survive winter in northern Germany with insufficient food and clothing and shelter. Helping others meant risking yourself. Eugene never forgot the men who risked themselves for him. Winter stretched into spring. The war ground on. Eugene heard rumors of Allied advances, of German retreats, of the Soviet army closing in from the east. The guards grew more nervous, more brutal, more willing to shoot prisoners for minor infractions. The camp population swelled as prisoners from other camps were consolidated, more men forced into spaces designed for far fewer. Then in early 1945, the order came to evacuate. The Soviets were too close. The camp had to be abandoned. The prisoners, thousands of them, weak and sick and starving, were formed into columns and marched west away from the advancing Red Army. This was the beginning of what would later be called the Black March, one of the most brutal forced marches of the war. They walked through snow and ice, through temperatures below zero, with no adequate clothing or food or rest. The guards shot anyone who fell behind, shot anyone who tried to escape, shot anyone who simply could not continue. Eugene walked on legs that threatened to fail, on feet wrapped in rags, with arms that could not even help him balance. He walked because the alternative was a bullet. He walked because other prisoners supported him, literally held him up when he stumbled, shared their last scraps of food when he could not go on. Men died every day. They died from exhaustion, from starvation, from disease, from bullet wounds. They died and were left in ditches by the roadside, left for German civilians to bury or ignore. Eugene walked past bodies of men he had known, men he had talked with in the camp, men who had simply reached the limit of what a human being could endure. The march lasted weeks. Eugene lost track of time, lost track of distance, lost track of everything except the need to keep moving, to keep his legs working, to keep his heart beating. He weighed perhaps 95 pounds now. His body was consuming itself, burning muscle for energy, shutting down non-essential functions to preserve the core systems that kept him alive. He dreamed as he walked, hallucinated, saw his family farm in Wisconsin, saw his mother cooking breakfast, saw fields green with summer corn. He saw his crew, saw them alive and laughing, saw them climbing into Rikki Tikki Tavi for a mission that would end differently this time. He saw the tail section falling and falling and falling, saw it impact the trees again and again, each time killing him, each time letting him wake to walk another mile. The guards began to disappear. First a few, then more, deserting as it became clear Germany was losing, as the sounds of artillery grew closer from both east and west. The column fragmented, groups of prisoners separating, some trying to hide, some trying to keep moving west toward the advancing American and British forces. Eugene was part of a group that reached the Elbe River in late April. They were walking skeletons, barely human, kept alive by stubbornness and luck, and the fact that their bodies had not quite figured out how to give up. They hid in a barn, too weak to move further, waiting either for liberation or death, no longer certain which would come first. American forces found them on April 26, 1945. Soldiers from Patton's Third Army, moving fast through collapsing German resistance, stumbled onto the barn full of Allied prisoners and could not believe what they were seeing. Eugene weighed 93 pounds. The medics who examined him said later they did not understand how he was still breathing, let alone conscious and able to speak. They evacuated him to a field hospital, then to a proper hospital in France, then to England, then finally home to the United States. The journey took weeks. Eugene spent most of it in hospital beds, receiving intravenous nutrition, antibiotics, treatment for the dozen different conditions that were trying to kill him. Slowly, impossibly slowly, his body began to recover. He would never regain full use of his arms. The damage was too severe, the bones too shattered, the nerves too destroyed. He learned to adapt, learned to function with limited mobility, learned to live with constant pain that would never completely go away. The Army discharged him with a medical pension and a collection of medals he had not asked for and did not want. Eugene returned to Wisconsin. He married. He had children. He worked, struggled, built a life from the wreckage of what the war had done to him, and he did not talk about it. For decades, he did not talk about November 29, 1943, did not talk about the fall, did not talk about the camps, did not talk about the march. His family knew he had been in the war, knew he had been a prisoner, but they did not know the details. He could not bear to speak them. Only late in his life did Eugene begin to share his story. A historian named Jack Breen researched the mission, tracked down records, interviewed Eugene extensively, and wrote a book called Tailspin that documented everything. The book brought Eugene recognition he had never sought. He received honors from veterans organizations, spoke at schools, met with other survivors. He carried his story until he could not carry it anymore, and then he let others carry it for him. Eugene Moran died having survived what should have killed him 100 times over. He survived the fall. He survived the wounds. He survived the infection. He survived the camps and the march and the decades of nightmares that followed. He survived because survival was what he did, because 19-year-old boys from Wisconsin are tougher than they look, because sometimes human beings refuse to die even when death would be easier. His story stands as testament to something beyond courage, beyond endurance, beyond any simple category we use to describe human capacity. It stands as proof that the limit of what a person can survive is further than we imagine, that the will to live can overcome injuries that should be fatal, that sometimes falling from the sky in a severed tail section is not the end, but only the beginning of a much longer fall back toward something like normal life. The B-17 Flying Fortress that carried Eugene Moran to Bremen was named after a mongoose who fought cobras without fear or hesitation. The mongoose survived because it refused to quit, because it adapted, because it was tougher than the things trying to kill it. Eugene carried that name into the sky and proved it meant something. He became the thing he flew inside, the stubborn creature that would not die, the fighter who kept going long after going should have been impossible. Remember his name. Remember what he survived. Remember that the men who fought that war were barely more than boys, that they carried unimaginable burdens, that they died in numbers we can recite but cannot truly comprehend. Remember that for every story like Eugene's that we know, there are thousands we will never hear. Thousands of men who fell from the sky and did not survive. thousands who made it home but could not speak what they had seen. If this story moved you, if it made you think about sacrifice and survival and the cost of freedom, please subscribe to this channel, hit the like button and comment below with your thoughts. Tell us where you are watching from, what city, what state, what country. Tell us if you knew someone who served, if you have your own family stories from the war, if Eugene's endurance means something to you. Share this story. Let others know what one 19-year-old boy from Wisconsin survived. Let them know what war really costs. Let them know that behind every statistic, every casualty figure, every victory and defeat, there are human beings who suffered beyond description and somehow, impossibly, kept living. Eugene Moran kept living. Remember that. Remember him.